I'm David Borden. I'm founder and executive director of StopTheDrugWar.org. The formal name of the nonprofit with which we've done most of our work at the UN is DRCNet Foundation. This is our 9th event in a series of meetings devoted, all of them devoted in whole or in part to the crisis in the Philippines of extrajudicial killings and and the impact that is having internationally. It's our second we're in association loosely with the Assembly of States Parties to the Rome Treaty. We are meeting at, well, first a note, we are being recorded and we're on the record. There is media here. So if anyone prefers to be anonymous, I'd recommend that you turn the camera off as well as edit how your name appears. We have three speakers coming up, and I will introduce them shortly, as well as my co-moderator, Marco. And I think what we'll do is we will do questions and comments after all three of the speakers are done. However, if anyone can't stay that long, and I anticipate speakers will be taking between 10 and 15 minutes each. If anyone will have to leave early, please write me in the chat and use the raise hand function, which you can find under participants in Zoom, and we can fit your question or comment in earlier than that if it's necessary. We are meeting at a time that is fraught in many ways, as well as hopeful in many ways. One fraught aspect of our time is one that I think we're likely to hear about from one or more speakers, but I will bring it up, which is that earlier this year, the Trump administration of the United States imposed sanctions against the International Criminal Court and members of its staff, theoretically, at a minimum, against individuals who provide support to the court. This we view as a very damaging action, and I will say, as an American, my belief is that our powerful government is capable of asserting its real or perceived interests without throwing human rights under the bus. The ICC is one of the world's human rights institutions, and it's a relatively young one. It should be supported. Last week, I believe it was, early during the ongoing meeting of the Assembly of States Parties to the Rome Treaty, Prosecutor Bensouda held a report launch on the status of their preliminary examinations, one of which is on the Philippines. It was widely reported that the Office of the Prosecutor feels there's reason to believe that crimes against humanity have been committed in the Philippine drug war. Less reported is two important aspects that we need to understand. One is that the preliminary examination isn't over. They are on the admissibility phase, to which probably the key aspect is complementarity. Does the Philippines have a credible process underway for addressing the extrajudicial killings? Is it on the way to putting in place a credible process? Ms. Bensouda has promised that there will be a decision on whether to seek authorization from the court to open an investigation by mid-year when her term completes. The other matter that I felt for some time is very consequential, but it's the first time it's been raised as prominently as it has. In two recent announcements a couple of weeks ago on requests to open investigations into the Ukraine and Nigeria, based on the findings of the preliminary examinations. OTP, Office of the Prosecutor, has stated fairly strongly that they do not have the staffing and financial resources to fully carry out the mission that the international community has charged them with. And in discussion on the webinar, Ms. Bensouda and other officials did not commit to at least formally requesting authorization for investigations on the remaining examinations should they determine that there should be examinations. That doesn't mean they won't put in such requests. They did on Ukraine and Nigeria, but it seems to pointedly leave open the question whether OTP will hold off on cases that they determine should move forward. And if they don't, it's still a situation in which everything moves much more slowly than it could. Not that cases like this could move as quickly as the humanitarian need or that all of us hope for under the best of circumstances. But these are some concerns that I hope we will talk about today. We are joined by my co-moderator and longtime friend and activist partner, Marco Perduca. Marco served for 6 years in the Italian Senate from 2008 to 2013. He serves on the board of an organization that is part of the steering committee of the Coalition for the International Criminal Court, which I'd like to recognize for all the work they've done around the ASP and for enabling NGO participation, by the way. Marco serves on the board of No Peace Without Justice. Marco will lead the question and comment session a little later. We will hear, I'll briefly know who the three speakers are, but we will hear from Phhillip Sawali, who is Chief of Staff and Human Rights Attorney, the Chief of Staff for Senator Leila de Lima of the Republic of the Philippines, who's approaching 4 years imprisoned in Camp Crame following her bringing a confessed former member of President Duterte's death squad from the time when he was mayor of Davao City, but not the first time she attempted to take on Duterte. We will then hear from Elizabeth Evenson, who's Associate Director of the International Justice Program at Human Rights Watch, and is HRW's representative on the steering committee of the Coalition for the International Criminal Court. And then we will hear from Mohammad Ashrafuzzaman, also known as Zaman, who is with the Asian Legal Resource Center based in Hong Kong and is in exile from his native Bangladesh. And we will hear something, I believe, about the drug war killings that began in Bangladesh following Duterte's example, and perhaps about the complexities of taking up the human rights abuses under that country's quite repressive government, while it simultaneously plays a productive role in the situation of the Rohingya, both in hosting refugees and in facilitating the work of the ICC on that case. And for those of you who have just joined, I'll just quickly repeat that we will be doing questions and comments following all three of our speakers. However, if you will need to leave early, please write me in the chat, and please use the raise hand function, which you'll find in the participants section of Zoom, and we can accommodate your question early if necessary. So with that, we will turn first to Fhillip. And Fhillip, I tested the screen share for your PowerPoint, and hopefully that will go smoothly. But if there are any hitches, we will work that out. So thank you very much for joining us well into the evening, your time.
So good day everyone again. Mga kaibigan, maraming salamat sa imbitasyon. Dave, thank you very much for this. Can you kindly screen share my slides?
Okay.
Thank you.
Can you see the screen share now?
Okay. So my piece is entitled "Holding Monsters to Account: The Role of Global Instruments of Justice in Ending the Climate of Impunity in the Philippines." Where do brutalized people go when domestic legal systems fail to provide them redress and remedy? Where can they turn to when at home they are turned away from the courts of justice and the corridors of power? Those are not my words. I borrowed them from my boss, Filipino opposition leader, prisoner of conscience, and foremost human rights defender, Senator Leila M. de Lima, who has been detained arbitrarily by Rodrigo Duterte's government for almost 4 years now, since February 24, 2017, because of her vigorous opposition to the government's project of extrajudicial killings of the poor in the so-called war on drugs in the Philippines. Next slide, please. I lifted that paragraph from the opening line of Senator De Lima's message that was delivered during the site events of the 39th UN Human Rights Council session in Geneva on September 13, 2018. In that piece that she titled "Shattering the Consensus of Silence, Let's Take Urgent Actions Against Impunity in the Philippines," the detained senator continued with more scathing questions by asking, and I quote, next slide please, "Thus, as high officials and agents of government themselves are involved in this spate of killings and attacks against our people, can we honestly expect the wheels of justice to turn? At the domestic level, can prompt and independent investigation of the crimes be conducted and the prosecution and punishment of offenders be ensured?" End of quote. Since Duterte became the Philippine president in June 2016, there has been a human rights calamity in our country. Extrajudicial killings, or what we call EJKs, under his so-called war on drugs remain unabated with total impunity. And there has been no let-up despite the pandemic. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, in her June 2020 report to the UN Human Rights Council, or UNHRC, found that these killings were widespread and systematic, and that at least 8,663 people had been killed, with other estimates, including from the Philippine Commission on Human Rights, of more than triple that number. This is validated by previous findings from civil society, media, and the academe. Also, there have been relentless attacks against human rights defenders, activists, and critics of the government. The UN High Commissioner verified the killings of 208 human rights defenders, journalists, and trade unionists, including 30 women under the present government. Just last August, this year, on separate occasions, gunmen shot dead Zara Alvarez, a paralegal of the human rights group Karapatan, and Randall Echanis, a leader of the peasant group Anak Pawis. Now the mayhem is likewise spiraling out and has claimed the lives of quite a number of professionals, including lawyers, judges, and doctors even. Even poor pesky neighbors I put them in quotation, poor pesky neighbors, the likes of mother and son Sonia and Anton Gregorio, were not spared as they were gunned down point blank in front of their house by a trigger-happy policeman. Reflecting on this double murder, next slide please, my friend and University of the Philippines professor John Molo wrote succinctly that, and I quote, please let's put the quotations from Professor Molo here. I quote, 4 days before Christmas, people woke up to the chilling video of a policeman killing a mother and her son in front of their neighbors in Tarlac. That's a province north of Manila. After thousands of deaths over the past 4.5 years, I wondered what made this one trigger national indignation. The video gave a clear answer. Broad daylight, several people watching, a crying mother hugging her son. The policeman clinically pulls out his gun, shoots her point blank, then he shoots her son. He shoots them again, then walks away. All of this as his young daughter watched. The public wasn't prepared to deal with a video that displays in full view the monster that the past 4 years have created, an emboldened and unaccountable police force. End of quote. And this is what we're getting for electing and then supporting a fascist and violent demagogue like Rodrigo Duterte. In September 2016, just a few months after his assumption into office, he promised the security forces that, and I quote, I will protect you. I will not allow one policeman or one military to go to jail. End of quote. And then in a public address early this month, just this month, December, Duterte added quite pointedly that, and I quote, wala akong pakialam dyan sa human rights. Translation, I don't give a damn about human rights. Meanwhile, not only does the bloodbath persist, the perpetrators and their inducers remain unpunished and in fact emboldened by the instigations of Duterte and his promise to law enforcers of immunity from suit for quote-unquote doing their jobs. In a preliminary study released in April 2018, more than 2 years ago, human rights lawyers organization Free Legal Assistance Group or FLAG observed that the documents they reviewed on 29 cases showed a lack of genuine effort to investigate, particularly on the matter of identifying and arresting the assailants. In a study involving 400 cases of EJKs in the drug war, lawyers group Ideals. Ideals means initiatives for dialogue and empowerment through alternative legal services. Now, Ideals revealed in their recent study of 400 cases of EJKs that they handled that only 32% underwent initial, that's the operative word, initial police investigation. And of this number, 98% went no farther than this first step, only initial police investigation. And for 58.5% of this set of cases, the families of EJK victims had not been given any information whatsoever. So, why is that Duterte and his co-conspirators are getting away with mass murder? There have been no political and social institutions in the Philippines right now. Parliament, judiciary, media, the church, civil society, you name it, that are strong enough and capable of checking Duterte and making him and his cohorts accountable for the mass atrocities and other grave violations of human rights in the country. The Filipino people cannot rely on any supposed system of checks and balance and accountability in their own government. Congress and the judiciary, the two branches of government that should be co-equal with Duterte, with the executive department, have largely become subservient to Duterte. no credible congressional investigation has ever been concluded to look into the killings and abuses. In joint sessions, Philippine Congress that is, has repeatedly rubber-stamped Duterte's declaration of martial law over one-third of the Philippines, a region we call Mindanao. The Philippine Senate also failed to assert its constitutional prerogative when Duterte decided to pull out the country from the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, thus depriving the 105 million Filipinos of an effective international legal remedy against the most egregious offenses: genocide, crimes against humanity, and crimes of aggression. As for the judiciary in the Philippine Supreme Court practically functions as a validator of Duterte's agenda. This is shown in such controversial decisions that allowed a hero's burial for the dictator Marcos, the politically motivated ouster of its own Chief Justice, the affirmance of martial law in Mindanao, and the confirmation of a patently dubious charge against Senator Leila de Lima. Now, what has been done so far to confront these monsters in the Philippines? Quite a lot, but not enough. Really not enough. Over the years, there have been various calls and several campaigns for the immediate stoppage of the drug war and other abuses. In June 2019, the UN Human Rights Council adopted a resolution mandating the UN High Commissioner to submit a comprehensive report on the situation in the Philippines. But last September, the said UN body adopted a diluted resolution for a diluted or emasculated resolution just for technical assistance to the Philippines, which was a huge letdown within the human rights community, as it failed to address the need for effective and independent investigation of EJKs in the Philippines. Now, a ray of hope came this month when the prosecutor of the ICC announced that she has found, and I quote, reasonable basis to believe, end of quote, that crimes against humanity, including those that pertain to EJKs, have been committed under Duterte's government. In the meantime, there are gimmicks deployed by the government to undermine the work of the ICC and the UNHRC, including the conduct of a so-called Human Rights Summit this month, and the formation in January this year of an interagency panel led by the Department of Justice to review police-implicated killings in the war on drugs. These moves by the Duterte government are monkey wrenches thrown at the ICC and the UNHRC after both institutions were nudged by the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights when she reported in June that, and I quote, there is no rule of law and due process in the so-called war on drugs, end of quote, and that there has been a failure of domestic mechanisms to ensure accountability. With zero accountability at home and the mixed results from the international arena, it is pretty obvious why the monsters are still roaming free all this time everywhere in the Philippines, whether in our city slums or in the countryside. The killings do not stop because no one is stopping the killers and their masterminds. There has been no political, moral, and legal compulsion to halt it. Domestically, the Philippine legal and judicial systems are largely inutile, almost ineffective, for us to expect the arrest, investigation, and prosecution of those behind the EJKs. Congress cannot be depended upon to carry out credible probes, recalling what happened in that short-lived investigation that Senator De Lima led at the Senate in August and September 2016, which resulted in Senator De Lima's ouster as chair of that relevant committee and her eventual arrest and continued detention up to now. This absence of any serious domestic investigation into the EJKs makes the Philippine government in a clear and fundamental breach of its duty under international law. According to the UN Human Rights Committee, The duty of the state to investigate is traceable from the general obligation to respect and guarantee human rights as provided in Article 2, Section 1 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, or ICCPR. ICCPR imposes on state parties, including the Philippines, the general obligation to investigate allegations of violations promptly, thoroughly, and effectively through independent and impartial bodies. Given the lack of credible domestic investigation, a UNHRC-led investigation has become paramount, both as a measure of justice to the Filipino people whose access to legal remedies domestically have been denied, and as a tool of necessity to prove that the resort to UN mechanisms and processes remains viable, and that the mechanisms to UN remains an option for the Filipino people, given that Duterte has already pulled out from the ICC effective March. Of course, equally urgent is the call now for the Office of the Prosecutor of the International Criminal Court to fast-track its process that can hopefully lead to the formal investigation of those behind the EJ case and other crimes against humanity. The report early this month by the prosecutor is still good news, especially to Senator De Lima, the Philippines' fightingest senator. Although it may not be known to many, is actually one of the earliest who submitted a communication to the ICC. For Senator De Lima, the UNHRC investigation and the ICC formal examination are legally correct, morally good, and politically sound. They are concrete, sustainable, and direct actions that can help deter the killings while holding the criminals responsible, affording justice to the victims and their families, and sending a clear warning against misguided governments, including Bangladesh and Sri Lanka, who idolize Duterte, that Duterte and his monsters are not worthy of emulation. Likewise, worth supporting are various efforts of different foreign governments to impose targeted sanctions against Filipino officials and their cohorts who are human rights violators. Senator De Lima welcomes the ARIA law and the Global Magnitsky Act in the US, the Magnitsky-like regime of the European Union, and similar proposals for a legal framework of targeted sanctions in Canada and probably Australia also. Finally, let me end in the same manner I began this presentation, which is by quoting again from that message to UNHRC from Senator De Lima. After some exposition about the realities in the Philippines, including the lack of independence of some who belong to the prosecution service and the judicial branch of government, Senator De Lima ended her message to the UNHRC with a call for action and a challenge to all Filipinos and the international community. Thus, and I quote, "But more than the appeal to actions from government and intergovernment bodies, there is cogency in the call for international solidarity and mobilization of public support to uphold, defend, and protect human rights in the Philippines and everywhere. We the people cannot afford to stay silent and depend passively on governments. We the people ourselves have to move with utmost urgency and in solidarity with each other, with political leaders themselves demonizing their own people and instigating human rights violations, the need for all of us to stand together and fight for the basic values of human dignity and equality of everyone, everywhere, has now become absolutely urgent." End of quote. Thank you very much to all of you. Mabuhay po kayo.
So thank you, Philip. And it is certainly sobering to think that it will soon be 4 years as of February 24th that the senator has spent behind bars. And so I hope an answer will be found to that soon. So our next speaker is Elizabeth Evenson, the Associate Director of the Human Rights Watch International Justice Program and their representative on the Coalition for the International Criminal Court. Thanks for joining us, Liz.
Thank you so much, Dave, and thank you for the invitation to be here and be part of this discussion. I think what I'd like to do is just to take a step back and situate whatever decisions the Office of the Prosecutor at the International Criminal Court might make on the situation in the Philippines in that broader context of what's happening at the International Criminal Court. And Dave, you touched on many of these dynamics in your introduction, so I'll probably just try to give just a few more details and set things up for our discussion after Zeman's presentation. So I think the way we've been considering, where is the International Criminal Court at this particular point in time, for us, we've really termed it to be quite a decisive moment for the ICC. I think most people on this call will know, on the one hand, how important the role of the International Criminal Court is as a court of last resort, often because of the many barriers that we all know to accessing justice nationally. The only real hope for victims of the crimes that are within the court's jurisdiction. So the importance of the mandate on the one hand, but on the other hand, how difficult it has been in practice for that mandate to be translated into meaningful, fair, effective justice. We have seen, disappointments in the court's performance. We have seen setbacks in prosecution cases. We've seen lengthy proceedings. We've seen a limited connection between the court and communities affected by these crimes, made more difficult by the fact that the court headquarters is in the Netherlands, often, very far from the situations that are on the court's docket. And these disappointments, these setbacks, they are not entirely because of decision-making by court officials. There are many factors that are really beyond the control of the International Criminal Court. Given that this is an international court, it's dependent on the political will of governments to support it and to provide concrete assistance. And some of the setbacks we've seen in cases have resulted from an absence of cooperation, a lack of arrests, which hasn't allowed proceedings to move forward, campaigns of witness interference that the court has not been able to address adequately. So there are a number of external factors that help us to understand why the court has missed the mark in fully living up to the mandate that's been given to it. But there are also mistakes that have been made by court officials in terms of investigative methodologies, in terms of, again, sort of how the court is oriented towards its outreach and public information efforts, and whether it has done enough to try to make sure that affected communities are really integrated across the work of the court, while at the same time, of course, catering to defense rights, which are really also very important to the credibility of this institution. So we've seen over the 17 years now that the court has been in operation, which is not a huge amount of time. I mean, this is the International Criminal Court has inherited the legacy of previous international tribunals, but it also has a very unique mandate. One of the other external challenges I should have mentioned is that mandate. We're talking about a court that has a potentially global reach, that needs to be active in multiple situations that are very different to one another in terms of operational realities, cooperation realities, information challenges, how to reach people, how to communicate, languages. Right now, there are open investigations in 13 different situations, 12 different countries. So translating the court's mandate in any one situation is enough of a challenge, but what the court has actually been called upon to do, given the continued commission of Rome Statute crimes and the absence of real alternatives in too many places around the world, is to translate that mandate across, a vastly different contexts, all at the same time. And so that has been a real external challenge. But against that, there have also been ways in which decisions by ICC officials, I think, could have been handled better to adapt to the reality of that challenge. Whether it could, even the best decision making, even the best policies, a standard of perfection that any of us would struggle to achieve, I think there would still be very significant challenges for the International Criminal Court to fulfill its mandate, given the political operational reality in which it finds itself. But that's where we are at this point in time for the court. And it's a moment, we've been saying it's a decisive moment because these are the challenges, but there are opportunities and there are also risks in terms of what might come next for the court. So the opportunities are in the face of these kind of widely acknowledged challenges that the court has had. Last year, ICC member countries commissioned a panel of experts to review the court's performance, something that is known as the Independent Expert Review. This is a panel of 9 external experts working across different issues at the court related to its governance, its internal governance, its relationship to states parties, human resource issues, as well as issues that are specific to how the judiciary functions and how the Office of the Prosecutor carries out its mandate for effective investigations and prosecutions. And this review process took place over the course of this past year, involving very broad consultations with court staff, with states parties, with civil society. There were unfortunately limits to how much civil society could engage. There were, few opportunities for the experts, in part because of the COVID pandemic, in part because of the timeline and the resources to really travel. And there were a lot of virtual meetings that were held, but obviously difficult for civil society in many parts of the world to engage with this process. So that was a gap and a shortcoming. But the panel produced what I think, even acknowledging some of these limits, has to be recognized as an extremely substantive, serious piece of work at the end of September, containing nearly 400 recommendations right across the court's work. Again, with the aim of strengthening the court. I think no one is questioning the necessity of the International Criminal Court or its critical mandate, but how can it do it better? That's really been the driving force. So with this report in hand, I think that the ICC community, court, states parties, other stakeholders are equipped to really have a meaningful debate and discussion. It doesn't mean that all of the recommendations are going to be accepted by all stakeholders. They need to be debated, discussed, but it really provides at least a reference point and a common framework, which has been missing until this process, to think about how do we, those who believe in the court's mission and mandate, understand what a significant development the creation of this court was, and that if it doesn't work, we really will have lost something when it comes to the protection of human rights. How can that be advanced? And that result of that review is also coming at a time, another area of opportunity, which is that the next ICC prosecutor will be elected by states parties in the coming months. This will be only the 3rd prosecutor at the ICC. Prosecutors serve 9-year terms. And obviously, given the role of the prosecutor and the prosecutor's office as a real engine of the court's work, it's a decisive and again consequential decision for states parties as to who the next prosecutor will be, and how that prosecutor will take forward this review process, how they will consider their mandate. But these are opportunities. I think it's also, though, a moment of risk. And that's because this International Criminal Court is operating in, it's a very fragile time for the global rule of law, for commitment to multilateral institutions. The real ambition of the ICC is a court that can hold even the most powerful to account. That's certainly what motivated my organization to campaign for the creation of the ICC. We think that's the vision that needs to continue to animate the court. But that mandate is going to come up against political opposition by those who have something to fear from accountability. And so I think the court's job is never going to get easier. I think, in fact, the more it does its job, probably the harder it will be. And it needs to be able to count on the support of the international community to overcome those who want to stand in the way of justice. And this is a moment of, real, fragility as to whether there is that consensus for accountability in the face of forces that are trying to erode that consensus and roll back the clock on the message that the ICC stands for, which is that the international community will not tolerate crimes against humanity, war crimes, genocide with impunity. And Dave, you already mentioned, we've really seen that materialize in the past year, most specifically with the US government under the Trump administration putting in place an executive order that allows the government to impose sanctions against court officials for certain activities and even those who might assist the court. And this has really been done in an effort to undermine the court's work, to deter the court from scrutinizing the conduct of US nationals and also the conduct of Israeli nationals, and try to bully the court away from that mandate. With the incoming US administration in a 6 weeks time or 1 month time, there is the opportunity for a changed approach. I think there needs to be very clear signaling from the US's partners around the world and ICC member countries that they want the new US administration to take an approach that supports the global rule of law, supports addressing allegations of wrongdoing, rather than attacking an institution which is just set up to hold those to account, and move away from what we've seen is a very perverse use of the US sanctions authority, an authority that is intended to actually counter human rights violations, but has been turned against a court that has as its mandate trying to bring accountability for the worst violations that amount to international crimes. So we'll see how that plays out, but it's just one indicator of the kind of pressure that the court faces. And the other, again, one that you already mentioned, Dave, is the resource issue. This has been a growing problem for the court for several years. I think of it as almost an existential challenge. It relates back to what I was saying about how you have this one court expected to act in many places all at the same time. Well, it needs better policy and practice to do that. I think that's the point of the review process. Resources are not the, I don't want to portray the only challenge here as being one about necessary financial and human resources. But I think it's clear that the court has not received the financial resources it needs to support investigations in as many situations as it's been, determined by its prosecutor to fall within the treaty's requirements. And this, I think, is going to come to a head. It already has come to a head. We've seen several years now of investigations that have been slowed down or delayed as resources have been stretched too thinly. And as you mentioned, Dave, the outgoing prosecutor has been clear that she intends to take decisions before the end of her term as to what to do in all of the situations where the office is considering whether the treaty requirements to open an investigation are met, these so-called preliminary examinations of which the Philippines is one. Her office wants to take decisions whether investigations should go forward, whether they should not go forward, or whether they should be kept open in some way to allow further analysis before the end of her term, which is in June 2021. But in decisions on two of these situations, a couple of weeks ago, Ukraine and Nigeria, the office found that an investigation would be warranted, but basically said that they need to sort of think and also consult with the incoming prosecutor as to how to prioritize and how to manage the court's workload in light of the absence of adequate resources. And as Dave said, this doesn't mean that they won't go forward with the next step would be applying to the pretrial chamber for permission to investigate. But it certainly seemed to put a question mark over how the court can manage its workload, given the reality of the resources that states parties have made available to it. And just the last thing I really wanted to mention is, at the same time, I think just also indicative that it's not only the U.S. It's not only U.S. pressure. Obviously, the Philippines withdrawal is indicative of the kind of reactions that states can have to the court trying to do its mandate. We've also seen a disappointing decision by the Office of the Prosecutor in the last couple of weeks to end its scrutiny of alleged abuses by UK forces in Iraq. A decision that I think can give rise to at least the appearance or perception of some double standards in how the court does its work, which is not to the benefit of the court's credibility. Of course, the Office of the Prosecutor would strenuously object to that characterization, but I think it just shows how under pressure the court's mandate is from many different directions. And so I think looking ahead to emerge from this moment of opportunity, but also one of risk, is really where we have to count on the international community to have the court back. And by the court, I really mean its mandate, and to make clear that they expect that this is a court that won't be bullied away from following the law, following the evidence, and encourage it and support it as well to have better policies and practices in place. And that if that happens, that the resources will follow, that the resources will really be there to actually translate this mandate into more effective delivery of justice for victims. Let me stop there, and hopefully we can come back to some of these issues in the discussion.
Great, thank you, Liz. And I certainly hope the Biden administration will take up the matter of the sanctions as soon as it possibly can, and transition officials I believe they've said that there's a plan to do a perhaps historically large number of executive orders on January 20th, reversing Trump policies. I hope that the sanctions against the ICC will be one of them, and perhaps even more returning to the Obama administration's approach of increased cooperation with the ICC. A state does not have to be a member to have a good relationship with this institution. So as Fhillip noted, Rodrigo Duterte has had an impact on the dynamics in other countries. There have been drug war killings following his lead in Bangladesh, also in Indonesia under President Widodo. Duterte has played a role in inspiring Sri Lanka to resume its use of the death penalty, including for people convicted of drug offenses. I don't think executions have happened yet, but I could be mistaken. I hope I'm not. And President Bolsonaro in Brazil during his campaign said he'd like to emulate Duterte's approach. Now, extrajudicial killings would not be a new thing in Brazil, which does have a serious problem. But I'm glad that we have Zaman here from the Asian Legal Resource Center, who will talk about what's going on in his country. Now we will be stopping at 10 a.m. Sharp in respect to the deliberations at the Assembly of States Parties. So don't cut your presentation short, but let's try to keep it within the 15 minutes if we can. So we'll have at least 15 minutes for discussion. Thank you, and thanks for joining us.
All right. Thank you very much, Dave, for the invitation and this opportunity to meet all the colleagues from different parts of the world, and also, listen to my colleagues based on their vast experiences on this multilateral justice mechanism, at the same time the ground realities that is happening particularly in the Philippines. So I mean, when Fhillip was making his presentation, if you take the name Duterte out and the country name Philippines out from them, and if you just replace it with Bangladesh, then everything is the same. I mean, the situation, the institutional aspect. So in today's discussion, I will limit within in three parts, three major aspects in relation to Bangladesh and today's topic of the meeting. The first one is there is no doubt that there is a replication of the Duterte style war on drug and extrajudicial executions in Bangladesh with the same characteristics of impunity to the perpetrators by all means from all state institutions, including the judiciary and other organs of the state. Then, and that also includes a very systematic denial of justice, access to justice to the victims in all layers of the judiciary. So if you talk about the Supreme Court, the situation is no better than the magistrates court under a common law system. And then there might be a slight difference. Bangladesh has quite a good number of gongos. That is a very popular word in Geneva-based human rights community. Pro-government NGOs, they support this kind of extrajudicial executions either by keeping silence or sometimes in this way or that way supporting that. And more than that, there is a big group of media. I mean, basically the entire pro-opposition media has been totally silenced and they hardly exist. I mean, many of them, they had to be in exile, and newspapers are either shut or the editors, publishers, and all those people are in jail under various criminal charges, including draconian law, Digital Security Act, and Special Powers Act, like that kind of charges, including sedition and so on. And at the same time, there is a, I mean, patronization of the drug lords. For example, one of the well-known drug lords who was chosen by the ruling party to be the member of parliament from Cox's Bazar, where these Rohingya refugees are housed in the refugee camps. So from that, one of the constituencies. So in the in this case, there is no reason to believe that people voted for him. Bangladesh is under one-party rule, and it doesn't have election since I mean at least two last elections in 2014 and 2018. The government rigged the whole election with the help of Election Commission and the law enforcement agencies, intelligence agencies, the judiciary. Everybody contributed to the process of a rigged system of election. There are lots of reports in the international media. I mean, at least to understand the very basics, if not the entire gravity of the situation. And then the government has another approach toward the perpetrators, is that they give awards to the perpetrators of the law enforcement agencies, like presidential medal, prime minister's medal, police medal, that kind of state honor to the perpetrators who are basically accused of executing people extrajudicially across the country. And the drug war that began officially in 2018 in May, when the Prime Minister declared that he has given order to the law enforcement agencies to deal with the people who smuggle or sell drug. So, and then the war on drug started formally, but it was on there. And there is a background of the extrajudicial execution that also we need to remember, that it was institutionalized since the war on terror that started after the post 9/11 situation in the world. While globally it has an impact, and Bangladesh created this special force called Rapid Action Battalion in 2004, and they institutionalized this kind of extrajudicial execution with complete impunity, and it has been intensified to another level. The extrajudicial killing is now, since 2009, it is coupled with enforced disappearances, which is when we are talking about the international criminal court system, so which is a crime against humanity under the Rome Statute. And Bangladesh, being a state party, falls into that under the mandate of ICC to deal with this matter. And for that, we are also trying to raise our voice. So, I mean, I'm just trying to be very brief to give you an overview. There is another perspective of the Philippine-Bangladesh commonness, that both countries had a history, it has a history of militarism and authoritarianism in the past. I mean, military dictatorship. The same time, in the 1980s, Philippines, the people fought against Marcos' dictatorship and were able to overthrow that military dictator. Bangladesh had similar experience. It has a 9-year-long military dictatorship of General Ershad, and in 1990, the people, took to the street, and in a long struggle, and the military dictator was overthrown. And in both countries, in 2-3 years back, about 4-5 years, gap, there was electoral democratization process started. And one of the aspect that I feel that it is very significant is that the transformation of institutions in these countries were not enough. It was quite inadequate and also ineffective. If we have another look to the experience of South Korea, for example, it had a militarized system for a long time. And in the same time, in the 1980s, when they were able to, overthrow the military dictatorships from the country, the transformation happened quite effectively. And the institutions started functioning to establish accountability in the country to a large extent, to trust that the systems of checks and balances are there in place. And one of the examples that we can see, that the immediate past President Park, while corruption allegations came against her, while as a sitting president, she had to face investigation and prosecution and step down, and the changes happened. So, this is just for example for, looking back. And then Bangladesh had a kind of so-called electoral democratization, but it could not survive. In 2014, there was no election. In 2018, the government, the election commission, and the entire law enforcement system and the ruling party, they did the ballot stuffing overnight before the election day. So, and Transparency International came up with a report that 96% of the constituencies that it had surveyed, and they found the proof that overnight ballot stuffing took place in those places. So, like by the time people were queuing up at the polling centers, they found that vote has already been cast. And BBC also recorded a footage, the journalists, that at 8 o'clock when the election was supposed to start, there were box full of stuffed ballot. In that, it was being carried from one room to another. And there was no satisfactory answer from the election officials about that, why the ballot boxes were filled up before the voting time began. And there are also reports published in the media about that. Video footage and photographs are available on that. So it has a relationship with the electoral system, how you manipulate it, and then once you assume to the office, due to the dysfunctional criminal justice system in place, you have vast room of corruption and acquiring the opportunities of acquiring undeserving wealth, the people's money basically, and then there is no accountability, there is no consequences for that. And to make sure that all other institutions has to be weakened by the people who think that these institutions might be a threat to themselves. And if you look at like the Bangladesh's immediate past Chief Justice, he disagreed with the government's constitutional amendment. So he had to basically leave the country. He was forced to leave the country and leave his office before his time of retirement. And now he is seeking political asylum in Canada, to the best of my knowledge. So anyone who goes against the incumbent, the government, the consequence is very, very, dire, and price is pretty high. So in the system, when the militarism is brought in a country and it is entrenched within the institutions, then if the changes happen like letterhead change without any thorough institutional change across the organs of the state, then we expect what is happening in the Philippines or in Bangladesh today. You have no resort to go. And in such a context, we need to think about how the international justice mechanism like the ICC and the other international communities are playing their roles. So let's see what the United States, for example. The Attorney General of Bangladesh, who is the longest serving Attorney General in Bangladesh for 12 years, he just died of COVID-19 a month ago. He's a gentleman who in the Supreme Court objected all the habeas corpus petitions in the case of enforced disappearances, and he defended the law enforcement agencies who were accused of committing disappearances. And then when he died, the ambassador of United States in Bangladesh, he tweeted that Mr. So-and-so, Mahbube Alam, the champion of rule of law, has passed away. That was his word, champion of the rule of law. And immediately when we saw that tweet of the ambassador, then I took a screenshot and I tweeted that again. And he then removed his tweet. Quite interestingly, I don't know whether it is correlated or not, it may not be, but then but the screenshots are still available there. So, this is just one small example that an ambassador who comes from a developed democracies, of course, I understand that he is serving the Trump administration at the moment. With the administration itself has a very questionable commitment regarding rule of law and democracy. But then any professional diplomat even should not be saying like that, having very basic minimum knowledge about how somebody in the office of Attorney General stood against justice or blocked the path to justice. So, and there are many other Western, I mean, developed democracies, including the European Union and others, they have similar frustrating role throughout this period of this war on drug and enforced disappearances and extrajudicial killings. I'm not going to the statistics at this moment because time is short. And then we raised this with the Office of the Prosecutors in privately whenever there were occasions before COVID started. And I have not, to be honest, I have not seen the interest or appetite on the part of the ICC officials to address this crime against humanity, particularly the enforced disappearances and the extrajudicial killings. And there is a difference that I see between Philippines situation that 14th of December this year, the OTP has published its report, and it has mentioned about the Philippines case, Republic of Philippines, in its report that after the preliminary examination, that it thinks that there may be, if I quote the exact language, it's okay. It's not needed. So in such comparison, if we see that the Office of the Prosecutor, while it is dealing with the Rohingya, atrocities case, the international crimes case, what I feel that they think, the OTP thinks that it needs the cooperation from Bangladesh as a state party to, have access to those victims and the crime scene, if it is not the real crime scene, but wherever the victims are located at the moment. And they don't want to disturb the Bangladesh government by digging into the crimes that the government itself has been committing for years. And they have a kind of reluctant attitude in that case. Whenever we try to talk to them, they were not, specific on that, whether there is anything they are going to do. They just say we are now dealing with the situation that is in our hand. So, the response is like that. So, which indicates that there is hardly adequate interest on that. But they should also see the other aspect of the reality is the Rohingya refugees are also being victims of the atrocities being committed by the law enforcement agencies, security forces of Bangladesh. You have over 100 Rohingya people who have been extrajudicially killed by Bangladesh's Rapid Action Battalion, police and border guards. So if the ICC or Office of the Prosecutor thinks that they are helping these Rohingya refugees in the forced deportation case, and if they want to at the same time ignore the crimes of the Bangladesh.
So Zaman's video feed seems to have frozen. Well, for the sake of time, let's proceed with questions, and if Zaman makes it back, he can conclude at that time. I certainly feel that was extremely important information and increased my my understanding in this of what's happening in that country, and I feel it relates quite closely to the other issues we've discussed here. So I will turn this over to my co-moderator, Marco Perduca, but sharing the thought that if people asking questions and people answering them can be extremely concise given the time, that will help. And also please use the raise a hand function if you can in the participant section. So Marco.
Thank you, Dave. Again, well, thank you everybody for participating, being with us during this side event. along the Assembly of State Parties meeting and taking place virtually in New York. The one in The Hague, I assume, in some parts was also held in person. I don't see any hands being raised at the moment, and we only have 10 minutes left. Okay, Art Garcia, you have the floor. Very concise. If it's a question, please let us know who would you like to answer that. Go ahead.
You're muted, Art.
You're still unmuted, Art. There's a lid on the bottom left of your screen. There's a microphone. You have to click on that. When it gets green, it means that you can speak. So perhaps, Dave, you can unmute him.
I've clicked ask to unmute. Why don't we go on to the next question, Arifa, and hopefully after that we can come back to you, Art. Arifa from SS Students for Sensible Drug Policy in Sierra Leone, who has worked on our campaign on behalf of Senator De Lima.
Thank you very much. And I'm so very happy today for joining this side events because it gives me a clear picture of whatever we've been doing. To the people who doesn't know me, my name is Arifa from Sierra Leone. I have been working with SSDP, and I've been the coordinator, the campaign coordinator for Philippine drug war killing. So my question is, now that we have so many indicators of human rights violations, you know, the extrajudicial killing and all of that, and for most of us here, like maybe afraid if Dave can recall back in the year 2019 when we organized one of our campaign events at the Sierra Leone House of Parliament. That was what our parliamentarians came out to say, that they have a tie with Philippine, meaning that they should not do anything in Sierra Leone that will hinder the bilateral tie between Sierra Leone and Guinea. So we were not interested in the bilateral tie between Sierra Leone and the Philippines, sorry. What we are interested in is that in the extrajudicial killing, we are interested in the life lost in the Philippines, and we wanted no life to lost in Philippines because of drug war and all of that. So I want to ask a question to this, to all of you, that how can we as Africans, especially us, the young people, can to have impact on the campaign that all of us are doing, especially for the Philippine drug war killing? What can we do to raise, or what can we do to amplify our campaign?
Thank you, Arif. I think we can also take Art's question and then go back to the panelists.
My question is for Phillip Sawali. What is now the situation on the case of Senator Leila De Lima, and to Gary King, what is the situation now of our proposed bill, the Philippine Human Rights Act?
Thank you. Phillip, we want to start with you, but as concise as possible because you only have 8 minutes. Thanks.
Okay, let me be brief. Arifa, thank you very much for your question. It's nice meeting you even online. Thank you for your support to Senator De Lima. Please continue supporting the call to free Senator De Lima. On February 24, she will be marking her 4th year of unjust detention. We'll be launching campaigns, and maybe we can collaborate and come together again for some concerted public actions. And also it can be a springboard for the bigger issues concerning human rights violations in the Philippines. So we will get in touch with you through David here. As to Art's question, so the trial of Senator De Lima has been quite protracted, very protracted and prolonged. It's almost 4 years that the trial has started, but the senator, I think in June, filed one petition for bail in one case and another bail petition in August for the second case. Now, the problem is with the third case. There are 6 judges who recused or disqualified themselves, inhibited themselves from handling the case, and it was only in October that the trial resumed in the third case. So the 2 bail petitions in the first 2 cases were awaiting the resolution of the judge. Of course, merit-wise, we're confident with the arguments and the evidence put forward by the defense counsel of Senator De Lima, really there is no evidence, much more credible evidence to indict Senator De Lima. The prosecution, meaning the government, has lined up all sorts of witnesses, police officials, NBI officials, AMLAC or Money Laundering Council officials, bank officials, even convicted drug lords. They lined up everything, but no one from these people has ever said that they have any transaction, much more illicit transaction concerning Senator De Lima as regards the drug trade. So really the government's case is collapsing. We're just hoping that the third case will also be expedited, and we're thinking that maybe in probably June or August this year, all the prosecution's turn in all the three cases will be concluded, and the judges in the three cases will have to decide whether to grant the bail for Senator De Lima or to ultimately dismiss the cases for obvious insufficient evidence against Senator De Lima. But there's that. Senator De Lima will be marking her fourth year of unjust detention in February, so we will be linking up with you guys, coming up with plans to drumbeat, highlight, and possibly loudly condemn the continued incarceration of Senator De Lima.
Thank you, Phillip. Can I ask people that are not speaking to mute their microphone? Elizabeth and Mohammed, you would like to give it a shot to reply to Arifa's question on what can be done? Please.
Yeah. I'll be very brief, and maybe I just want to take the question and direct it to what could be done to support the International Criminal Court's work, whether on the Philippines, depending on decisions the office makes, or in other situations. And I think what's important there is that, and there is a really important role for civil society to amplify voices of support for justice. Governments that belong to the International Criminal Court, like Sierra Leone, need to continue to hear that people want this court to do its job, that they want it to do it independently, that they want it to live up to the aspirations of the court's founders. And countries, I'm based in the United States, and so governments that don't belong to the International Criminal Court also need to hear of a desire for the court to really reach its universal potential. So I think there's a absolutely tremendously important role for civil society. Civil society has been kind of, step by step there with the creation of international justice, with the creation of the International Criminal Court. And because the court depends on that political will, because there will be political challenges to its mandate, it needs to hear from people, and the role of civil society in amplifying that voice, the role of parliamentarians in amplifying that voice in support of justice in the face of so many pressures to actually minimize and curtail and prevent victims from accessing justice.
Thank you. Liz, Mohammed, would you like to give it a shot, or shall we wait for another question and then perhaps reply?
Yeah, let me interject on that. Before Zaman replies, let's add into the mix a question from Leon Buon from Rappler.
Hi guys, I'm Lian Buon. I cover justice for Rappler. I guess anyone can answer. I'm going to ask about the process of the ICC or the OTP specifically, because the language of the report of the prosecutor says she has found reasonable basis to believe that crimes of humanity has been committed, but she says she has yet to decide if she will indeed seek authorization to investigate. With that language, what do you think is the likelihood that she will indeed ask authorization to open an investigation, and what is the usual attitude of the pretrial chamber on such requests, also given in the context of the Afghanistan case, where the initial decision not to open an investigation because of the lack of cooperation has been reversed? And in applying that to the Philippine situation, where our president is clearly very allergic to International Criminal Court.
Thank you, Leon. Who wants to try? Can I say something while we decide who's going to reply? And an additional element to take into consideration is also the issue of the death penalty. The Philippines 2 weeks ago voted in favor of a universal moratorium through a resolution being voted at the General Assembly of the United Nations. So, and while last year they voted against. So there are things moving. I don't know if there's actually an answer to what Lian is asking, but perhaps Mohammed or Liz may know more. Philip may have a different sense. Who wants to go first?
Okay,
Um,
I would briefly, very briefly, and then Liz can answer the rest of the questions. You know, particularly the previous question about Senator De Lima, these are political cases. You don't need evidence. I mean, having evidence and not having evidence doesn't make a big difference, because everybody knows that the system is subservient, and the entire judicial mechanism is functioning according to the wish of the incumbent government. And that's why, I mean, everything is happening. It's a protracted the system, and the injustice and all other things. And the other component of the bigger picture is that this crime against humanity that is being committed in Philippines or elsewhere, as Liz has said, that we actually need to work from the civil society perspective. What I would say that it's not only within the domestic boundaries, we need to be very much active in different government level, particularly who have a very stronger voice in the international justice mechanism. In those places, we need certain form of advocacy or the other form of activity, so that we are able to convince them. So expecting that the challenges that the court may be facing, that can be overcome, and justice becomes the top priority for these cases that we are fighting for. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Liz, I know you have to go, so if you want to just say a few words about this, and then we take
Yep,
goodbye.
thanks so much, and I'm sorry that I have to drop off. But Leanne, on your question, I think unfortunately it's really impossible to speculate what the Office of the Prosecutor will do. The next phase, as they indicate in their report, is, and Dave also said, is looking at admissibility before taking a decision about whether to seek authorization. The Afghanistan decision that you mentioned, which has now been reversed, it was really an extraordinary decision. If you followed that logic of the pretrial chamber to its extreme, it would essentially prevent the court from doing its job, because they seem to require such a guarantee of cooperation, a guarantee that just doesn't exist in any situation, and also doesn't really recognize that the willingness of government authorities to cooperate changes and is subject to influence. And you can't say for certain that it will be there. You can't say for certain that it won't be there. With the reversal of that decision, I guess we'll have to see whether any pretrial chamber in the future would consider that to be relevant to their determination. We certainly hope not. We certainly hope that sense of what the pretrial chamber should be looking at when it takes these decisions. Any questions about feasibility, operational issues, those are really for the Office of the Prosecutor to make. They're not part of the requirements of the Rome Statute. So unfortunately, I can't predict what will happen. I will just say that initial decision by the pretrial chamber in Afghanistan was seen as quite an outlier and quite a dangerous decision, and luckily now the appeals chamber has reversed it, and the investigation is open in Afghanistan, if actually on pause. Thank you so much for inviting me here today and letting me be part of this discussion. I apologize that I have to leave.
No need to apologize. Thank you very much for staying with us an hour and a half. We hope to be in touch with you soon. And unfortunately, there's going to be a lot of reasons for next year to continue the fight for not only Senator De Lima, but also to put Philippines on the table of the ICC. Thank you. Philip, would you like also to add something to the other comments?
Let me just say that one, I will be available today to forward any remaining questions to Liz and other speakers. And Liz probably won't be the only person who has had to leave for the official session, but I'm happy to keep the chat open for now for those who do wish to stay. So
thank you. Philip, would you like to add anything?
No, I'm okay. I'm okay. The Lee's answer is perfect. Anyway, I cannot pretend to be an expert in the workings of the ICC.
Thank you. Maybe, I don't know if anybody else wishes to raise a physical or a digital hand, or otherwise we can, I think, conclude. Before concluding, giving back the floor to Dave, I would like to say two things. One, we have to thank Dave Borden for everything he has been doing for the last 3.5 years. We started with a side event in 2017, CND in Vienna, with a lot of media attention, which I think in a way helped in putting this discussion inside a building where the Philippines were not being discussed at all. And from there, we were able to start interesting other parties to start the great work that has been made public recently by the Office of the Prosecutor. The other thing is that everybody, all the people here, all the people that in the Philippines and around the world are insisting on asking for justice are making a huge difference, because without civil society, this would not be happening. So it is true that the ICC has a lot of problems. Actually, I met Dave 2 weeks before the diplomatic conference took place in Rome. We were in New York for the first UN special session of the General Assembly on Drugs. It was June 1998. A lot of time has passed, a lot of things have happened, but without civil society, the ICC may still be a discussion in some academic circles. So it's important for us to continue doing what we're doing, that is documenting human rights violation, but also hooking them up with international criminal law. And as many of you may know, drug trafficking was supposed to be the reason why the world wanted to have an ICC in the late 80s. So a lot of things have changed, and not because governments changed their mind, but because the civil society said there was a better way to organize an international supranational jurisdiction. So thank you, everybody, once again. As said, Dave, perhaps in concluding, you can remind your personal email so that people can keep on not only asking questions, but also subscribe to the newsletter and remain in touch for a possibly a better year 2021. Thank you. Dave.
Sure. Well, I've reposted my email address in the chat, and I'll be glad to coordinate follow-up questions with our speakers. As before, I'm willing to keep the chat open for now for those who are not leaving, maybe already left for the to watch the official sessions. But it's late in the Philippines, so let's not go on too much longer. Art Garcia actually asked a question of Gary King on the status of the Philippine Human Rights Act, which is a bit.
I would like to defer to Paul Bloom. He's more able to speak about this current status.
We've been lobbying on this for a while now, since it was introduced in September, and we've been trying to get co-sponsors from members of the House, and we're up to about 30 right now, but they're all Democrats. And the pushback we get is about China. Anytime we're lobbying now on military aid to the Philippines, it's China, China, China. So we have to change our messaging a bit. And some of us think we need to change the text of the law. It has to be reintroduced next session. So there'll be some discussion before it's reintroduced. But Congresswoman Wild says she wants to reintroduce the bill. We need to get some Republican support, and we need to deal with the China issue.
We had a question in the chat, not directed at a specific speaker, and it's also a question that's which is hard to predict the answer, but from Melo Acuna, who notes that Democrats usually highlight human rights. Do we think the new U.S. government will change the atmosphere in countries where human rights violations take place more often? Well, I guess that has two sides. what will the new administration do differently, and then what impact will that have, or could it have in other countries? Um, and I feel I feel certain the new administration will be a huge improvement over the current one in terms of human rights. But things have never been perfect. Um, in U.S. policy as well. Um, Hopefully, people do what they can, and I'd welcome perspectives on that from anyone here. But Philip, maybe you're best placed to, or others from the Philippines in attendance, if anyone would like to weigh in. Also, um, those of you in the Philippines are best placed to speak to what impact the Biden administration could have, depending on what actions it takes.
Yes, of course, we're hopeful that the new administration in the U.S. will take cudgels for human rights and rule of law in the Philippines. Uh, well, well, despite the Trump administration, we know that there is ARIA law. That's the Asia Reassurance Initiative Act. uh, there's categorical and legislated affirmation by the U.S. government that it is for universal human rights and democracy all over the world. If it happened during the Trump administration, this area law, I think there's more reason to be more optimistic in the coming years during the term of President Biden. So where we are just basically hopeful, and we are ready to collaborate and to connect with everyone there in the capital or with our friends and allies there in the US to possibly exploit or take advantage of any avenues that may put a spotlight on the situation in the Philippines and to seek accountability in the Philippines, given that we have ARIA law and Magnitsky and all the other targeted sanctions regime in the US.
Hello?
Oh,
May I address it to Paul Bloom? Why not connect the China security law on Hong Kong on the Philippine Human Rights Act? Because it is the anti-terrorist law that Duterte is trying to implement in the Philippines is a carbon copy of the what we call the China security law on Hong Kong. So at least we can connect the dots and really what we call, as you say, we have to redirect the Philippine Human Rights Act, because if it's purely Philippines, the Republicans will never support it.
Well, even some of the Democrats push back on when you want to limit military aid to the Philippines, because they talk about the West Philippine Sea and all the issues there. And it's we of course we bring up the Anti-Terror Act, but and we bring up all kinds of things. We got all kinds of evidence that something is needed to gain attention from the Philippine government. So I think people are working on that, but the China issue is a big one. We'll have to see what Biden. The speculation is that Biden is not going to change strategy all that much. So, we're going to keep working on it. And the Anti-Terror Act is a good issue to bring up. I mean, for sure. And we'll see how the government implements that. But our suspicion is it's not going to. I'm sure Philip would agree that it doesn't bode well for the people of the Philippines.
And I'll go ask, and I think this will be good background for others here. You brought up the China issue, Paul. So what are the dimensions you see to, what are the different things we mean when we talk about the China issue for the Philippines.
I'm not quite sure what Ago's referring to here, but of course the main issue is the de facto containment policy right now of the U.S. government, and the Philippines being one of the key governments that, along with Vietnam and Indonesia and so forth, that the U.S. wants to have on our side to contain China. I don't know what, we'll have to see what the new State Department says. I'm sure it's going to be much easier to talk to them, but how that works out in the end in terms of military aid to the Philippines, we'll see.
Arifa has asked about next steps in the campaign, and also are we hoping to get more African countries next year to join? And I believe this needs to be a global effort in which all parts of the world, including the developing world and especially the non-white parts of the world, need to be represented. The idea of Duterte uses the idea that criticisms of him are examples of the West and white people telling the Philippines what to do. Of course, what we're doing is working with people in the Philippines who are standing up to his abuses. And so as our campaign and others move forward, I hope that more African countries, in particular, given the role the ICC has played there, which is beyond that in other parts of the world to date, will be involved. As for next steps, on our end, we are we have some things preparing to roll out soon, including a newsletter, Philippines crisis, social media strategy, campaign video we've been working on for activism in different places. Not sure yet. There needs to be more financial resources to support it. I'm also I'm reluctant to get involved in in-person demonstrations that I'm not, in immediate physical proximity to myself during the pandemic, and the resolution to the pandemic in terms of vaccinations is going to occur at different rates, unfortunately, in different parts of the world. But that doesn't mean people shouldn't do things. That doesn't mean there aren't things we can do. We're thinking about online events centered on different countries or regions. So it's in the thought stages. But I hope we have to do something in February to mark the 4-year anniversary of Senator de Lima's incarceration. But most importantly, because things can't wait. Philip, do you have thoughts on what would be helpful from grassroots and grasstops activists, NGO advocates around the world?
Yes, just continue doing what we're doing, and I think we have to expand to other regions as what Arifa has been asking. Maybe we can we can tap more more platforms in social media, and get the younger ones, the young activists, and what we call here millennials, to be on board. They have the time and the energy and the zeal, I think, and we can do. We can. I think we just have to push the envelope farther with all these mixed results in the international arena, what I call mixed results with the UNHRC and the ICC is taking quite a while with this process. So just keep on pushing, and maybe we all of us can band together and make the Magnitsky-like regimes in EU and possibly in Canada and Australia work for uh, for the Philippines to go against human rights violators and corrupt officials here and anywhere in the world.
Um, are there any questions or comments from others in the meanwhile?
The only comment that I have, hello, can you hear me, please?
Yes, we can hear you.
So the only comment that I have is, human rights violation in a particular country is a violation around all over the world, because for many countries we've signed to these treaties. So simply meaning that on your campaign, David, I'm talking to you directly to all campaigners that we try as much as possible that we get, like Phillip was saying, for me in Sierra Leone, I believe in the energy of the young people, because our voice matters, and whatsoever we decide to do, we do it with clean, we just do it because, we are just passionate about it. And the impunity going around the world, especially the Philippines, is very, very, very much, let me say it's bad. So this is the time that we should demand justice for Lima. This is the time we should demand for her to be free from jail. And for Sierra Leone, I can take, well, I will not promise anyone officials, even including the Deputy Minister Polion Koroma, is my brother. I have so many government officials that have stake into the country's affairs. So we can make use of this network and transform them into resources. I mean, we can use their voice if only we can able to influence them to make sure that we get this matter, at high peak, especially when now that we have Madam Samba as one of the judge at ICC from Sierra Leone. So maybe Arifa sparking up the issue of the Philippine campaign in Sierra Leone might be a test case for Madam Samba to handle, if only we are able to involve stakeholders, because just need to get someone that is passionate about this, is passionate about human rights, someone that wants Leila to be freed from jail and all. That is what we want. So basically, David, please, for whatsoever you are planning for the International Day of the Philippine Day of Action 2021, keep me informed, and just keep me posted, and make sure that you give me early notification, so that I will get, I will get colleagues involved from across the country, because I don't have to do it alone. It's not about Arifa. It's about all young people in Sierra Leone coming on board, joining the Philippine campaign, and joining the Philippine people, joining to make sure that we seek justice. Because in Philippine, injustice in the Philippines is injustice in Sierra Leone. Injustice on Lima is injustice on Arifa as well. I speak international language. I don't talk local language, because I believe whatsoever happens to me, affects people all around the world, across the world, is demanding. So basically, in solidarity with the Philippine people, I feel with you. I stand with you. It's rather unfortunate that I don't have the power. It's rather unfortunate that I can influence much. I just hope I can do that. I'm really, really in sympathy with you. And I want this extrajudicial killing to stop now, and not at any other time, but now. I believe now is the time. That's the language of us, the Africans. When we want it, no more time. If there has been anything going wrong, if we can work together now, then we can see the change.
Thank you. And your support has been quite strong and steadfast for, I think now, a few years. As far as the judge from Sierra Leone, I think it's my sense is how that play a role is that is something to point to in Sierra Leone, maybe in other countries in Africa, to demonstrate the stake that the region has in international justice and the role that the region plays in justice for others. At the legal level, and I'll combine this with some questions, comments that Boots Felixberto here in the DC area made in the chat. The office of the prosecutor, and if this goes to a trial, the court itself, they're going to follow the legal process. And so right now there's a stage remaining in the preliminary examination of admissibility, which principally means does the Philippines government have a credible process, a credible, adequate, and capable process for addressing the killings? And right now, I think probably everyone here, well, I can't speak for everyone here, but my guess is most, if not all people here would say clearly it does not. And so the statute implies, and a year ago, Prosecutor Bensouda said, if the statute and the findings of an examination imply there should be an examination, her view is that there should be. Hopefully, that means that at a minimum, the Office of the Prosecutor will seek authorization to open an investigation, and then that the court, I believe it's the pretrial chamber, will provide that authorization, and the investigation will formally begin. This does not, even if so, that does not answer the question of prioritization. And so how quickly will it go? Under the best of circumstances, these investigations take a long time. And as Boots pointed out, the Duterte administration might end in 2022. Who will be the next president, whether it'll be an ally of Duterte, like his daughter, or more hopefully a leader, a human rights-minded leader of the opposition, like Vice President Robredo, who bravely provided a video for our first UN event on this issue in 2017. May have an impact on how the Philippine government proceeds. And so based on the history, it's hard for me to see an investigation completing and indictments being issued before the middle of 2022. But I'm no expert, and sometimes things change. During assuming an investigation is continuing at that point, the court, maybe even if they have reached maybe even after they do potentially file indictments, the court, the prosecutor's office in particular, will be looking at what is the Philippine government doing. So if a hypothetical Robredo administration reinvigorates the Philippine justice system, and there's perhaps a special body to investigate the killings and find a way moving forward. And defining moving forward, that's sometimes that's defined broadly. That can take multiple forms. You know, the decision makers at the ICC would be looking at what is in the interests of justice. And so if Duterte is no longer in power, but he's living, and certainly other perpetrators in this will be living for a while, cases can be brought at any time. And so justice can be done in these cases for some time to come, but influencing the situation to stop the killings is, for the immediate future, what happened, the ICC's political impact, the impact of an investigation, the impact that could be had in the Philippines of an investigation commencing, on public opinion, on the choices that orchestrators of the killing campaign, or even the individual killers, their choices might be influenced by the increased risk of prosecution. The sanctions that the U.S. State Department appears to have brought against some responsible officials, we've heard have had some impact, because if people are afraid they won't be able to come to the U.S., that affects their families. So those are my thoughts. Maybe others have thoughts on what the ICC will do, or Fhillip or others, on how this could affect the dynamics within the Philippines. And I also say we will shut down at 10:40 when Marco will have to step off. But maybe first, Fhillip, do you have any thoughts to add to that, and then Gary?
Fhillip, did you want to respond to that, or?
I'm okay.
Okay. My brain came back again. So the question is the Philippine Human Rights Commission. I'm old enough to remember fondly that that's where Leila de Lima started out and did a super job, even before she was Secretary of Justice. And, you know, Duterte is really mad at them and wants to burn them down and slap their faces. But is there any, that's a group that is a lot more popular and known in the Philippines than the ICC. So I'm just wondering if there is anybody there that's working, and or is there anybody there we can approach?
Yes, of course, the Philippine Human Rights Commission is working, but not a lot, not much. We have very good friends, very what Dave said, human rights minded commissioners, including the chair, Chito Gascon, and maybe two other commissioners, but they are not united. They have their own dynamics and maybe politics within the commission. But the bigger challenge really is that the Philippine Human Rights Commission is not really a powerful constitutional body, just like the other commissions on audit, on election, on civil service. It's more of just a watchdog for human rights. It doesn't have investigative or prosecutorial powers. We're hoping that they can be given those powers. And Senator De Lima actually filed a bill to strengthen the mandate as well as the powers of the commission. But more to your question, maybe yes, we can remind the commissioners and the whole commission to step up and to put more pressure on the Philippine government, not only concerning the case of Senator De Lima, but the general human rights situation in the country. taking advantage of its watchdog status. Maybe it can do more investigations. It can publicize results of whatever investigation it's conducting over the years, especially as regards the thousands of EJK cases and the shrinking of civic spaces as well here in the Philippines. Maybe they can take on a more dominant or prominent or public or visible role in the Philippines as well as abroad, to take the cudgels for the human rights community as well as the human rights defenders who have been under serious attack by the government. So we're really hoping that the Philippine Human Rights Commission can be an effective body. But as I said in my presentation, there's no political or social institution in the Philippines that is strong enough to go against Duterte, and the Philippine Human Rights Commission is one of those, should I say, weakened institution to stand up to Duterte today.
The Department of Justice earlier this year set up an interagency task force to re-examine the drug war killings, and a few weeks ago held a human rights summit. There were there were people from the CHR, from civil society participating, clearly in hopes of achieving something. Is there anything to these two efforts? Are there people on the inside who are trying to do what they can, and these could be vehicles that could help modestly, perhaps, or is it going to turn out to be just a show and tool that the administration can use to make its case politically in the Philippines and to allied authoritarian governments that it actually is trying to do something to respond to and stop the killings when it clearly isn't.
Okay. So can I respond to that just very quickly? Dave is talking about two gimmicks of the Duterte administration. One is the creation of this interagency review panel led by the DOJ, and second is the conduct of the so-called Human Rights Summit early this month. This, as I said, these are gimmicks. These are political ploys meant to just distract the work of the ICC and UNHRC and the other probably foreign governments and intergovernment bodies out there to do their work and to demand accountability behind the killings and other abuses here in the Philippines. On the review panel, number one, it's just a review panel. It's not conducting a formal criminal investigation. And what is it reviewing? It's reviewing police-implicated killings. It's not investigating, or it's not reviewing, I said. It's not investigating other forms of killings. The majority of EJKs in the Philippines are done by vigilantes or death squads. And third, it is too weak. The review panel is too weak because it is composed. It includes in the panel representatives from the PNP and the PDEA, the Philippine Drug Enforcement Agencies, two agencies of serious concern. They are of course implicated in all this EJK. So how can that panel be objective? I mean, honestly, in their assessment of the killings and in the conduct of their work. And lastly, it came too late. These gimmicks came too late. It's obvious that these are monkey wrenches designed to really just derail, if not totally confuse, the moves and the intensified campaigns moving towards ensuring that justice mechanisms, at least in the international arena with the ICC, UNHRC, and the global Magnitsky regimes in different foreign governments are doing and working We're hoping that those mechanisms abroad will work towards ensuring that investigations can be done and accountability behind the killings will be ensured. So these are nothing but delaying tactics and propaganda, political propaganda, really.
So Art raises his hand, and after Art's comment, we will conclude.
I will give more credence to the Senate, especially the 12 senators who signed the resolution for a Senate investigation on the spike of killings this last 6 months. No matter what happened to the investigations, the Senate will particularly core the Commission on Human Rights, the opposition, the democratic opposition, the civil society, and more can be discussed in the Senate. And also the Makabayan Bloc also initiated an investigation in the lower House of the Representative. But as we know, the House of Representatives is more House of the Thieves or representatives who are all legal robbers. At least the Senate has a semblance of independence. But we will know. But we are on all fronts. If we will ask our plan of action, although uncoordinated, we have the office of Senator Leila de Lima is still active in the Senate, and she can still, although she is being not allowed to participate, which is a travesty of justice. She was elected, but she is not being recognized by the Senate controlled by Duterte. But at least we will fight them in all the arenas, and also we are still fighting the anti-terrorist law anti-terror law in the Supreme Court. No matter what will be the decision, the Supreme Court will decide on it. And I have a gut feeling that the Chief Justice is resigning because that will be his last act. Maybe declaring the Vice President illegal, or the what we call the passing the anti-terror law. Come what may, we will still fight. We will be fighting here in the United States. Our job is really to pursue the passage of the Philippines Human Rights Act, and I will send Paul Bloom the email. If we can help in drafting if it will be repiled, it should be more the effects of China's what we call Duterte's collaboration with China. We should hit on that, and also so that people will not say we are only what we call parochial for the Philippines, but also we are concerned with the international violations of human rights everywhere. Because as we always say, especially in the United States, para an injury to one is an injury to all. So we'll continue to fight. In the Filipino term, we say, laban lang, continue on the fight.
The forum will end, but the fight will continue on. And so thank you again, all of you, for joining us on short notice, especially those of you who are here so late from the Philippines, and those of you like Art, who joined us so early from California. I will type my email address one last time in the chat. Feel free to write me with any follow-up questions for speakers, for us, suggestions. I'll send out an email with links when we post the footage, as well as a copy of your presentation, Phillip. We plan to continue working on this issue and to make it a major focus. So good luck to everyone over the still challenging several months, and hope to see some of you in person when we can.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Sorry
you.
for being late.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you. Happy holidays.
Merry Christmas to everybody. Happy New Year too.
Bye-bye. Thank you again.